here to celebrate Constitution Day, a little belatedly, because Dr. Krannawitter is a tough guy to get sometimes in a timely fashion. He's teaching, and he's got a lot of demands on his time, so we're fortunate to get him, even if it is belatedly. And it's something, that we as Americans should celebrate more. When you think about the other holidays that get so much more attention, Labor Day, for instance, which I'm like, Labor Day, come on, a celebration of unions. It's amazing that we don't celebrate it more and have a time to reflect on it. So we're honored and blessed today to have that opportunity because now more than ever the Constitution matters. We live in a time where our country seems to be drifting so far from those solid moorings in which it was set at the founding. So those of us who still look to the Constitution, believe it's still relevant, are happy to be able to bring Dr. Tom Krannawitter to talk to you today. Dr. Krannawitter is a professor of politics at Colorado Christian University, where he teaches American politics and political philosophy. He taught before that at Hillsdale College. Scott Hall at Hillsdale College is with us today, where he directed the Washington Hillsdale Intern Program. He is also a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, where he previously served as vice president. He's also taught at Claremont McKenna College and Azusa Pacific College. He holds a PhD and an MA in political science from the Claremont Graduate University and 2 bachelor's degrees, one in political science and another communications from Fort Hays State University in Kansas, which is his home state. He has received graduate and research fellowships from the Olin Foundation, from the Earhart Foundation, the Winston Churchill Society, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, the Institute for Humane Studies, and he's a Salvatore Fellow at the Heritage Foundation in 1998. Dr. Kranawitter's most recent book is Vindicating Lincoln, Defending the Politics of Our Greatest President. That might take, Lincoln is controversial in certain circles. You might get some questions about that. He is also the co-author of A Nation Under God, the ACLU and Religion in American Politics, and a contributing author to Challenges to the American Founding, Slavery, Historicism, and Progressivism in the 19th Century. One additional item I'd like to mention today that I'm really excited about is Dr. Kranawitter's association now with the Leadership Program of the Rockies. I know a number of you have gone through the program. If you haven't, and don't know about it, it's a wonderful program. And he's going to be heading up the LPR's Defenders of the Constitution series. So it's really exciting to have him in Colorado. I'm sure it's a loss for Hillsdale, but it's a gain for Colorado. Colorado Springs, hopefully, and the leadership program to have him here. I could go on and on with his credentials and honors, but then he wouldn't have much of a time to talk to you. So please help me welcome to another Food for Thought lunch, Dr. Thomas Krannawitter.
Thank you, sir.
Try that mic or not?
No, I'm just going to...
Okay.
I think I'm just going to boom out there. Can everyone hear me in the back of the room? Is this okay if I'm going without the speaker system? Thank you all for coming out today. I want to thank my friend Scott Hall for coming out. It's especially fitting that we're celebrating the Constitution. My friends John and Patty Smith showed up. John Smith won the Defenders of the Constitution program in LPR this last year, so this is a fitting crowd. Congratulations, John. As we think about the Constitution, I think the most remarkable feature and lamentable feature of our politics today is that the United States Constitution has become almost irrelevant. Almost. There are still parts of it that we pay attention to, such as the parts that call for elections every couple of years. The good news is we still are having elections when the Constitution says we should. But huge swaths of the Constitution are ignored routinely by all 3 branches of government. I'm sure most of you know this, given that's why you're in this room. But just to refresh your memory, you remember last year when Congress was debating the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and in a press conference, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was asked, "Isn't this unconstitutional? Where does Congress have the authority under the Constitution to require citizens to purchase health insurance? Where is that in there?" And do you know what her response was? She laughed. She said, "Are you serious? The Constitution?" And her point was, who the hell cares about the Constitution? We're Congress. The Constitution means whatever we say that it means. And it's not just on that side of the aisle. If you go back a few years earlier, a Republican in the United States Senate who ran for the presidency against Barack Obama last year sponsored the most sweeping restriction of free speech rights in American history, McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform. He too was challenged on the constitutionality of his bill. And when he was challenged by a journalist, he said, "You're asking me if this bill is constitutional." My answer is, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just a sitting United States senator. What do I know about the Constitution? He went on and said, if somebody has a problem with my bill, they can sue and some judge can figure out whether it's constitutional or not. And then conservatives run around complaining about judicial activism when there is a leader in the United States Senate, a Republican, saying, I have no idea what the Constitution means. And then it gets even worse. A man I have deep respect for, and I think is a very good man, but I think he stumbled. I think one of the low points of the presidency of George W. Bush is when he signed that bill into law, and as he was signing McCain-Feingold campaign finance, he said, I hope some judge strikes this down because I think this is unconstitutional. He's the president of the United States. Why didn't he veto that and go make a big deal to the American people and explain why that was unconstitutional and make a fight about it? We could go on and on and on with lots of examples. But the question is this. What happened to the Constitution? How did it become so irrelevant in our politics? As I've studied this and taught this subject, written about it, I think the Constitution has suffered two blistering critiques. Perhaps lethal. We don't know yet, but very serious critiques. I'm going to talk about one of them today. If you want me to talk about the other one, you have to invite me back, and I'll come back and talk about the other one. One critique of the Constitution is the critique leveled by progressive intellectuals about 100 years ago. And their argument was, it's a complicated theoretical argument, but it boils down to this. Human nature is evolutionary, and therefore, a constitution that was designed for human nature in the 18th century is no longer useful or applicable to human society in the 20th or 21st century. And therefore, we either need to ignore the Constitution or redefine it as a living organism, an evolving document. That was one critique. The critique I want to talk about today, in a way, is more potent politically. And it's a very serious critique. And it argues that the Constitution is fundamentally immoral because it is a racist document. And it's a racist document because it was written by a nation of people who owned black African slaves. And they are morally inferior to us because we today, we don't have slaves. They did and we don't. And therefore, we have no moral obligation to obey a racist document written by racists 200 years ago. And I will put on the table, and I'm serious about this, if that critique is right, I agree with them. If it is an immoral document, if it is a racist, immoral document, I don't feel any obligation to follow it. Maybe we should discard the Constitution for something else. But I don't think that is the case. I think I want to offer you a different way of looking at this subject. A different way that offers, perhaps, you can tell me if I'm successful in this or not. What I want to do is offer a moral defense of the Constitution. Before we even get to the level of parsing out what this clause means or that clause means, the first question is, should we care about the Constitution as a whole or not? And that requires a moral justification. And I think the goodness of the Constitution, the goodness of the United States of America, is best revealed by studying and analyzing the problem of slavery in America. That might sound a little odd at first, but let me flesh this out. And I'm sure all of you have run into this subject, right? Anytime the Constitution, the issue of the Constitution comes up, What's the very first subject? What's the very first response, the very first criticism? Well, it's a racist document. It had protections for slavery in it. That criticism, just to give you a sense of how powerful that is, we had a big election last November, right? And a bunch of conservative Tea Party type Republicans won a big majority in the House of Representatives. Do you remember this January when they started this new session of Congress? Those conservatives in the House, do you know the very first thing they did? Do you remember? They read the Constitution out loud, stood on the floor of the House of Representatives and read the Constitution out loud, except for the parts dealing with slavery. They skipped over it. And during that, one of the liberal Democrat who was in the chambers shouted down and said, "Read the whole thing, including those slavery parts." And I was in agreement with him. Yeah, read the whole thing. Read those slavery parts, and it gives you a whole new take. We should not only read it, we should be talking about it. How do we think about this? Here's the fundamental problem of slavery in the American founding. Well, let me back up just a second. I'm going to put on the table a couple of facts that you all know, but it's good to be reminded of. First of all, the institution of human slavery is as old as human history. Slavery in various forms has been around since the beginning of recorded time. It is thousands of years old. Second fact, in 1776, when the Americans were declaring independence, slavery was a global business. Slavery existed on every quarter of the globe. Everyone was involved with it. Therefore, the existence of slavery in no way made America unique. If anything, the existence of slavery made America perfectly typical. It made America like the rest of the world. If the Americans weren't engaged in slavery, we would raise this question, why? Why not? Everyone else was. And yet, this institution that's been around for thousands of years, and virtually no one had ever thought to question it. No one in Africa challenged it. No one in ancient Greece, in the Roman Empire, in Europe, in Asia, in South America, nobody questioned the rightness of slavery. And yet, beginning with the British North American colonies, when those people declared independence, and they did it on the principle that all men are created equal, before the ink was dry on that declaration, slavery became a problem in America. And it became not just a problem, it became the problem. It became such a problem that within 77 years, to use Lincoln's dating at Gettysburg, more than 600,000 Americans would be butchered and slaughtered and torn to pieces in a desperate effort to get rid of this horrible institution. In fact, let me put a little finer edge on it because it's true. More than 600,000, mostly white men, were butchered to get rid of black slavery. Where had that happened in human history? Where had anything like that happened in human history? Nowhere. If you knew nothing else about the story of slavery in America, if you only knew those facts, I think that reveals much about the goodness of America. For this simple reason. Slavery is a problem only in a good regime. In a regime dedicated to justice, in a regime dedicated to the equal rights of all human beings under God, slavery is a problem to be solved. Nazis didn't run around wringing their hands worried that Jews were being enslaved before they were shoved into gas chambers. There was no contradiction between Jewish slavery and the principles of Nazism. There is a massive contradiction between chattel slavery and the principles of the American founding. And in the end, the Americans uphold their principles and get rid of this institution. And I say bravo for that.